3 days. That is the number at the center of this story. Not the death itself. Deaths happen. Not the inheritance. Money changes hands every day. 3 days. The will had existed, unchanged, for 14 years. It had been written when the family was whole, when the relationships were simple, when no one had reason to question anything. And then, 72 hours before a man named Robert Calloway took his last breath, someone changed it. Was it him? Was it the person who stood to gain? Or was it something else entirely? By the time the family found out, the money was already moving. Robert Calloway was 71 years old when he died. He had spent 40 years building a construction business from nothing. He was not a war man, by most accounts. He was fair. He was reliable. He kept his word. He left behind 3 children from 2 marriages. His eldest, James, was 44 for his first marriage. He had worked in the business for 12 years. His daughter, Nora, was 41, James's full sister. She had left the business a decade ago to raise her children. She and her father spoke every Sunday without fail. And then there was Derek. Derek was 33, Robert's son from his second marriage. He had joined the business 3 years ago, later than the others, louder than the others, and considerably more interested in the financial side of things than in the work itself. Every family has a Derek, the one who arrives late to the table and immediately wants to know how much everything is worth. The will, as it had stood for 14 years, was simple. The business, valued at approximately $4 million, to be divided equally between the 3 children. The family home to pass to James and Nora jointly. Robert's personal savings and investments split 3 ways. Clean, fair, what everyone expected. And then Robert was diagnosed with a fast-moving cancer in October. He was given 4 to 6 months. He was dead in 11 weeks. The will reading was held on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the funeral. James and Nora sat together on one side of the solicitor's conference table. Derek sat on the other side, alone, and he arrived, James would later notice, already calm. Too calm. The solicitor, a woman named Ms. Hartley, opened the folder and began to read. The date at the top of the document stopped James cold. That date? That can't be right. The will was written in 2009. This is the most recent version, Mr. Calloway. It supersedes all previous documents. It was executed 14 days ago. 14 days ago. 3 days before Robert died. When Robert was on palliative care. When, according to his medical records, he had been assessed as having significantly reduced cognitive capacity due to his pain medication. The new will was read aloud. The business, all of it, to Derek. The family home, to Derek. The savings and investments, to Derek, minus small fixed sums for James and Nora that amounted to less than 3% of the estate's total value. Nora's hand found James's arm under the table. Derek looked at neither of them. He was looking at Ms. Hartley. He was already asking about the transfer timeline. James and Nora did not confront Derek in that room. They thanked Ms. Hartley, collected their copies of the document, and left. In the car outside, they sat in silence for a full minute. He did something. I don't know exactly what he did, but this is not Dad. I know. So what do we do? James had a friend, a barrister who specialized in contested probate. He called him from the car park. The barrister's first question, before anything else: what was your father's condition in the final 2 weeks? Specifically, was he on any medication that could affect decision-making capacity? James knew the answer immediately. Robert had been on a high-dose opioid palliative regimen for the final 3 weeks of his life. His hospice nurse had documented on 2 separate occasions that he was, in her words, not consistently oriented to time or circumstance. That documentation would become the cornerstone of everything that followed. Meanwhile, Nora began working a different angle. She called every family member who had visited Robert in his final weeks. She asked one question each time. Did Dad ever mention changing the will? Did he say anything at all, about wanting to do things differently? 7 people, 7 conversations. Not one of them had heard Robert Calloway say a single word about changing his will. The contested probate process takes months, but the evidence begins to surface immediately if you know where to look. The first crack appeared within a week. James obtained the visitor log from the hospice for his father's final 14 days. Derek had visited 6 times. Each visit was in the afternoon, between 2 and 5 o'clock. The window, as the nursing staff confirmed, when Robert's medication was at its peak sedative effect. The solicitor who executed the new will, not Ms. Hartley, a different firm entirely, one Robert had never used before, had visited the hospice on a Tuesday afternoon. Derek had been present for that visit. Here is the detail that changes everything. A solicitor attending a terminally ill patient to execute a major will change is not unusual. It happens. But the solicitor is supposed to see the client alone, without family present. That is a fundamental protection against exactly this kind of situation. Derek had been in the room. The second piece came from Robert's regular solicitor, the firm that had held the original will for 14 years. 3 weeks before Robert died, Derek had contacted them. He had asked, on his father's behalf, for a full inventory of the estate's assets. Robert's solicitor had sent it to Derek. Robert had never asked for it. There was no record of him authorizing that request. Derek had simply called, stated he was acting for his father, and received a complete financial picture of a £4 million estate. The formal challenge to the will was filed 8 weeks after the reading. The grounds: lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. Derek, through his own legal team, maintained that the will was valid, that his father had known exactly what he was doing, that the change reflected Robert's genuine wishes, his desire to reward the child who had shown the most commitment to the business in his final years. Mr. Calloway was a man of sound mind who made a considered decision. The fact that his other children are unhappy with that decision does not make it legally invalid. Then James and Nora's barrister stood up. He presented 3 things. First, the hospice nurse's documented assessments of Robert's cognitive state in the 2 weeks before his death, signed, dated, and entered into the medical record. Second, a statement from the executing solicitor, obtained under oath, confirming that Derek had been present throughout the will signing, and that he, the solicitor, had not conducted a private capacity assessment of Robert before proceeding. Third, a handwriting analysis of Robert's signature on the new will against his signature from 3 months earlier, before the heavy medication began. The analyst's conclusion was measured and specific. The signature on the new will showed markers consistent with, and these are the analyst's words, significantly reduced motor control and diminished deliberate intent. Derek's barrister requested an adjournment. It was granted. Derek did not look at James or Nora when he left the room. He had stopped being calm. The adjournment lasted 3 weeks. When the hearing resumed, Derek's legal team had changed their position. They no longer argued that Robert had been of full capacity. They argued, instead, that Derek had genuinely believed his father wanted this change, that he had acted on verbal conversations with Robert that no one else had witnessed. A dying man's alleged verbal wishes against documented medical evidence of cognitive impairment. against a solicitor who admitted he had not assessed capacity independently, against 7 family members who had heard nothing of the kind. The judge's ruling was clear. The new will was declared void on the grounds of both lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. The original 2009 will was reinstated in full. The business, 3 ways. The family home, to James and Nora. The savings and investments, 3 ways. As their father had intended, as it had always been, Derek was not prosecuted. The judge noted that while the circumstances were deeply troubling, the evidence of deliberate criminal fraud, as opposed to manipulation and opportunism, did not reach the criminal threshold. He kept nothing. He also lost the 3 years he had spent in the business because James and Nora voted as co-owners to end his employment within a month of the ruling. James told me that what stayed with him, long after the legal process was over, wasn't the greed. It was the timing. That Derek had watched his father deteriorate over 11 weeks, had visited him specifically in the afternoons when medication was highest, had brought a solicitor to a hospice room, had stood in a room while his dying father signed a document he may not have fully understood. 3 days. That was all the time between the signature and the death. 3 days in which Derek must have known, must have believed that he had won. There's a particular kind of patience required to do what Derek did. To wait, to plan, to calculate the exact window of vulnerability and move inside it. What he didn't calculate was that the people he was stealing from were also patient and considerably better prepared. The hospice nurse's notes, the visitor log, the unauthorized asset request, the solicitor in the room. None of those things were secrets. They were just details he didn't think anyone would look for. He was wrong. If this story stayed with you, there are more below. And if you are navigating something like this, start with the records. Always start with the records.